In this video, we'll go over 10 of the best cards in the game, which have a cost of paying 1,000 life points, which is a surprisingly common cost, so a lot of these cards are pretty powerful. And at number 10, we have Exchange of the Spirit, a card which could have probably taken the number 1 spot on this list if it wasn't for the fact that it got an errata. You see, the old effect of this card was if you had 15 or more cards in your graveyard, you could pay 1,000 life points so that both you and your opponent would swap your decks with your graveyards. So what you would do with Exchange of the Spirit was just get 15 of your own cards into the graveyard while making sure your opponent had no cards in their graveyard, and then you would just activate this card to swap the decks, which would instantly mill your opponent out of all the cards in your deck, and then you would win by just simply ending your turn, where your opponent wouldn't be able to draw any cards for their turn, so you'd win the duel. And Exchange of the Spirit to Makura the Destructor FTK is one of the most consistent decks you can build if you play with a whole bunch of banned cards and their pre-errata effects. However, this card did get an errata because it was an incredibly broken card before, where now both players need to have 15 cards in their graveyard for it to use its effect, which means you can't instantly win with this card anymore. And they even slapped on a once per duel restriction just to rub salt in the wounds. And now the card is not good at all, and only makes a spot on this list for legacy reasons, kind of like the next spot on this list. And at number 9, we have Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End. This card's effect is to pay 1,000 life points to send all cards in the field in both players' hands to the graveyard, in which case you get to inflict 300 points of damage to your opponent for each card sent to your opponent's graveyard with this effect. And this card is super easy to bring out, as you just have to banish one light and dark monster from your graveyard. And to top it all off, it has great stats, as it has the exact same stat line as the Blue Eyes White Dragon, who's the capstone for high attack normal monsters. And this card was incredibly broken, just like Exchange of the Spirit, which is why they gave this card an errata. Where now, it still has the same effect in summoning condition, but you just can't use any other card effects the turn you use the effect, which actually did enough to slow this card down that it almost doesn't see play in meta decks anymore. It's still a nice target for the Melody of Awakening Dragon, and it is a nice body to be brought out with only 2 monsters from your graveyard. Because you see, the way this card was broken before was you could set up your graveyard so that you could bring this card out, as well as get a monster on your side of the field, which would allow you to search after it uses its effect, like having a Sangan on the field that would let you search out Yatagarasu. But with its new effect, you wouldn't actually be able to activate its effect on the same turn you set everything up. So you'd have to wait a turn before you could use its effect, in which case your opponent would probably get rid of everything on your side of the field, or disrupt whatever you had set up. And even if you just set up your graveyard instead, and then use the effect to clear the field, you'd then have to pass to your opponent because you'd have to wait until your next turn before you could start actually using the stuff. Basically, it's errata turned what used to be possible in 1 turn into a 3-turn ordeal, to use it in the same way it was used when it first came out, which definitely slowed the card down to the point where it's no longer used for its effect. But everything else about this card was still so good that it still occasionally sees competitive play, which should really say something about how broken this card was in the past. And at number 8, we have Judgement Dragon. This card was probably modeled after Chaos Emperor Dragon, because what its effect is you can pay 1,000 life points to destroy all other cards in the field. And in order to bring this card out, you just need to have 4 or more Lightsworn monsters with different names in your graveyard. So if you have multiple copies in your hand, you can just bring them all out since you don't actually have to remove any resources for this card to come out. You just need to have a graveyard state set up. Although the other Judgement Dragons would destroy each other, so the best way to use this card would to bring out one of them, destroy the field, and then bring out the other copies from your hand. And that's why when this card first came out, this card was placed on the limited and semi-limited list for a handful of years, because it was just way too strong in the past format, as the effect is not once per turn. When you bring out Judgement Dragon, you can just keep paying 1,000 life points to destroy all the cards in the field, just in case your opponent had a whole bunch of cards that could float or something. Judgement Dragon was probably a mistake of a boss monster, because it's so easy to summon while having good stats on a non-once per turn effect, that they definitely don't do things like this with boss monsters anymore. Well, kinda. Eventually broken cards will slip through the cracks. Now, even though Lightsworn decks have basically seen competitive play since they came out, and never really stopped seeing play, a lot of modern versions of the decks don't even play Judgement Dragon anymore, because it's not really needed, as Lightsworns are all about sending cards from your deck to the graveyard during the end phase, which is actually just really good setup for the graveyard with graveyard effects, so that you can go into link monsters or something. A strategy which doesn't really revolve around trying to get Judgement Dragon out of the graveyard, as it would get milled there pretty constantly in the past. And at number 7, we have System Down. This card has the effect to pay 1,000 life points to banish all machine-type monsters your opponent controls and in their graveyard. And this is one of the best anti-type cards in the game, as this card existing as a side deck option immediately makes machine-type decks less valuable. And that's why System Down sees heavy competitive play in the side decks, whenever a machine-type deck is seeing some kind of success. Because being able to get rid of all of your opponent's cards from their side of the field and graveyard, banishing them even, is surprisingly a super good effect. For the simple price of 1,000 life points, you can just kind of win the duel against certain decks with this card, which is why it kind of has to make this list, at a slightly higher spot than Judgement Dragon, since this card does see more play than Judgement Dragon, surprisingly. And at number 6, we have Cosmic Cyclone. This card allows you to banish any one spell or trap card on the field at the cost of paying 1,000 life points. So it's basically like an MST and has all of the benefits of MST of being a quick play spell card, except it has a life point cost to it, and it removes the card in a better way, as there are not a lot of spell or trap cards that have floating effects, so you're pretty safe in just destroying them by card effects. However, for the few decks that do have floating effects on their spell or trap cards, Cosmic Cyclone is just a better option for removing those cards, as almost no spell or trap cards float upon being banished, except things like Waking the Dragon or XYZ Dimension Splash. And that's kind of why Cosmic Cyclone sees so much play alongside things like Twin Twisters, which allows you to destroy 2 spell or trap cards on the field. Because sometimes just banishing one spell or trap card that can float is better than being able to get rid of multiple. So it's just a staple spell or trap card removal card that's used alongside Twin Twisters, Lightning Storm, and even the old school MST. It's also the most popular form of spell or trap card removal in Duel Links as well, but mainly because they don't have the other 3 cards I just mentioned. And at number 5, we have Chicken Game. This is a field spell card, which allows the turn player to pay 1,000 life points in order to activate one of 3 effects. You can either draw 1 card, have your opponent gain 1,000 life points, or destroy this card. It also has a passive effect on the field, where the player with the lower life points takes no damage, and for some reason, its activated effect on the field is spell speed 4, so you can't negate it once you use it. And currently, this card is banned in the TCG, but not in the OCG for some reason. Because you see, with this card, you could basically just pay 1,000 life points to draw a card, which allows you to go hand neutral after using it. Your opponent can use this as well, but the general strategy of using Chicken Game is activating another copy on top of it so that you can draw another card. As this card is only a soft once per turn effect, so it acts almost exactly like an Upstart Goblin and allows you to dig through your deck easier. Except for the fact that Chicken Game can be searched out of the deck a lot easier than Upstart Goblin, since it's a field spell card, and there's a lot more support for field spell cards than there are for normal spell card searching. And those search effects allow you to thin your deck even more, which can be further expanded upon if you play Pseudo-Space, which is a field spell card that can allow you to banish a field spell card from your graveyard in order to gain that card's effect for the turn. So with 3 Chicken Games and 3 Pseudo-Space, you could draw 6 cards at the measly cost of 6,000 life points, which was equivalent to playing a 34 card deck, or even lower if you count all the cards used in order to search out these field spell cards. It just added a layer of consistency to a lot of combo decks, and allowed Exodia decks to top certain events. So they then banned Chicken Game for being too good at drawing cards with all of the support cards that existed for field spell cards. But apparently this isn't a problem in the OCG for some reason, as it has no restrictions over there. And at number 4, we have Instant Fusion. This is a card that allows you to pay 1,000 life points to fusion summon a level 5 or lower fusion monster from your extra deck, basically for free as you don't use any of its materials. You just cheat that card out of the extra deck and it gets counted as being fusion summoned properly, so it can be brought back from the graveyard later on with cards like Monster Reborn. But there are some restrictions to it. It does need to be a level 5 or lower, the card can't attack the turn it's brought out, and it's destroyed during the end phase. And this effect is so good that level 5 or lower fusion type monsters have to be balanced around the fact that this card exists. And they sometimes even place cards on the ban list because of instant fusion, like Elder Entity Norden for example. Being able to cheat monsters out of the extra deck is one of the most powerful effects in the game, and Instant Fusion allows you to do that pretty easily. The monster gets to keep its effects for the turn, which allows you to bring out stuff like Thousand Eyes Restricts, to absorb one of your opponent's monsters and then go into link plays. It also just gives you an extra monster on the field for all kinds of other ways you might need it. Like if you specifically need a Thunder type monster on the field, Instant Fusion can give you one of those instantly so that you can use it for bringing out Thunder Dragon Titan, for example. Instant Fusion is just so useful in so many different kinds of decks that I think it's in leagues with some of the banned cards on this list, and why I place it at a higher spot on this list than a card that actually is banned, like Chicken Game, because it's just so game-changing and so heavily used, because there are so many different ways to gain advantage from getting a level 1 to 5 monster from your extra deck out, and all at the measly cost of 1,000 life points, and a hard once per turn on its effect. Honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that it had a hard once per turn on it, it probably would have been banned ages ago. And at number 3, we have Confiscation. This is a banned card which makes you pay 1,000 life points to look at your opponent's hand in order to select and discard one card. Essentially, this is a 1-for-1 in card advantage and doesn't really advance the game state very much, but this effect is actually incredibly powerful. You see, there's this other card called Neospacian Aqua Dolphin that was thought of as a joke card for a long time, but then support was released that allowed it to be played a little bit easier, and it all of a sudden started seeing tons of play, because it had a watered-down version of Confiscation as its effect, where you can discard one card to look at your opponent's hand, and then discard a monster if it had less attack than a monster you controlled. So it was used to get rid of hand traps, since most of them have less attack than Aqua Dolphin. So Confiscation would absolutely see play, as noted by the fact that Aqua Dolphin saw play, because hand traps are so prevalent in the current metagame, and being able to snipe it out so easily with Confiscation would just allow you to go through your combos without any kind of interruption, which is super valuable for meta decks. Even if you don't target hand traps, you can just get rid of one of your opponent's only starters in their hand. If you know your opponent's combos and plays well enough, you can just completely stop them from putting up any kind of meaningful board with a single Confiscation. There's just so many ways to take advantage of being able to look at your opponent's hand and then get rid of any card you want, which is why this card is banned. But funny enough, it was the last banned card of the 3 spell cards that let you remove cards from your opponent's hand, because it was thought to be the worst of the bunch. But speaking of them, and at number 2, we have Delinquent Duo. This card allows you to pay 1,000 life points to essentially discard 2 cards from your opponent's hand, one of them at random and the other one based on your opponent's own choice. Now, you don't actually get to look at your opponent's hand or choose the cards you discard like you can with Confiscation, so some people might even say Confiscation is better. But Delinquent Duo is an inherent +1 in card advantage, since you're losing 1 card to get rid of 2 cards from your opponent. And having your opponent start with 2 less cards in their opening hand is such a huge advantage that I think Delinquent Duo is still better. Because it means they have less cards to potentially have hand traps to stop your plays, and less cards to potentially go into their combos. But due to the random choice nature of its effect, there is always the chance they'll just send a good graveyard effect monster to the graveyard, and the random discard will be one they didn't need anyway. So it could be useless, unlike Confiscation where you're pretty much guaranteed to hit a good card, as a much weaker version of these 2 cards, called Appointer of the Red Lotus, has been seen play recently in competitive meta decks. Appointer of the Red Lotus requires you to pay 2,000 life points to look at your opponent's hand, and then it only gets rid of 1 card from your opponent's hand for 1 turn. They don't even lose the card permanently like they did with Delinquent Duo or Confiscation. And people are playing this card because being able to look at your opponent's hand and get rid of one of their best cards is pretty good. And you can't really beat an inherent +1 in card advantage that Delinquent Duo gives you. So I'd say it's a little bit better than Confiscation, though I could totally see arguments comparing the 2 because they're both great, which is why they both get high spots on this list. And at number 1, we have Magical Scientist. Remember how I said Instant Fusion is such an amazing card because it lets you easily cheat out monsters from your extra deck for only 1,000 life points? Well, Magical Scientist allows you to do this as well, except it doesn't have a once per turn on its effect. And it also allows you to use level 6 or lower fusion monsters. So it has a little bit more monsters it can choose from than Instant Fusion. Although there are some downsides to the monsters you bring out with Magical Scientist. They can't attack directly, and they return to your extra deck at the end phase. which are really light restrictions to be honest. Magical Scientist basically allows you to special summon as many monsters as you have life points to spend, and can easily allow you to go +7 in card advantage, as long as you have 7 or more level 6 or lower fusion monsters in your extra deck that can be cheated out of the extra deck, and you have at least 7,000 life points to spend, going based on the standard rate of you start with 8,000 life points. And that's super good advantage, which can be used in so many different kinds of ways considering instant fusion is so heavily played and only lets you bring out one card. Even back in the day when Magical Scientist came out, players were still able to use this effect to instantly win on their first turn, with cards like Catapult Turtle, who would distribute all the cards it brought out in order to inflict damage to your opponent equal to half their attack, as pre-erotic Catapult Turtle could use its effect multiple times per turn. In today's metagame, you could just use Magical Scientist for a whole bunch of extra deck plays in order to set up great boards, because that's some excellent advantage to obtain from an easily summonable monster that can be brought out directly from the deck with a 1-for-1. So I'd say having a soft limit of +7 in card advantage is pretty good justification for putting this card at the #1 spot on this list, as the best card in the game, which has an effect that you have to pay 1,000 life points to activate. If they ever wish to unban this card, they would probably just do it in the way they unban all the other broken cards in the game, and just give it a hard once per turn on its effect. If they just did that, it would be kind of a worse instant fusion, but I'm sure it would still see lots of play. Alright, and that's the list. There are a surprising amount of cards that require you to pay exactly 1,000 life points to use their effects. And if you like how specific this list was, I got the idea from this video from a comment in one of my previous videos. So if you have any ideas for videos similar to this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. And fun fact, did you know only 28.5% of people who watch these videos are actually subscribed to the channel?